Hey there, it's John from Heroes and Legends, and welcome to another day of Amonkhet previews. We got a lot of cards to talk about today. We got a couple big ones. You can see on the screen there we have Nissa, Steward of Elements. We'll be going into detail on that one in just a moment. We also have the Green God that has been revealed, Rhonas, and a little story behind that. I'll get to that when we get to the card. Quickly, before we do get started though, if you check out the description below, you'll find a couple ways to support us, one of which is the Amazon affiliate store. If you make any purchases through any of the links there from any Amazon seller, a small percentage will come back to help support the channel. It really goes a long way. Secondly, another way to support us, of course, is through Patreon. So check out the link down below for our Patreon page. All right, there's a lot to talk about. I want to get going. And we'll start off with the card we saw yesterday. This is Ketra the True. Later on, after they revealed Ketra, they did reveal the Invocation version. So I just wanted to show it to you. We talked about this card yesterday, so if you want to hear my thoughts on it, check out yesterday's video. But there's the Invocation. And let's just get right into it with Nissa, Steward of Elements. A blue, a green, X, Planeswalker Nissa, X loyalty, +2, scry 2, 0, look at the top card of your library. If it's a land card or a creature card with converted mana cost less than or equal to the number of loyalty counters on Nissa, you may put that card onto the battlefield. -6, untap up to 2 target lands you control. They become 5/5 elemental creatures with flying and haste until end of turn. They're still lands. I'll cut to the chase with this card. The raw power is there. Like, this is definitely standard playable. It just needs to find the right deck. The deck has to be very creature heavy. If you can find yourself a creature heavy deck that can hang in the current meta or in a future meta, then this card can certainly get there. I love the fact that if you only have 3 mana, you can put her down. She comes in with 1 loyalty, but then you can plus her 2 and scry to make her 3 loyalty relatively quickly. I like the fact that she can hopefully protect herself, even though it is a little random, by pulling a creature perhaps from the top of the library and putting it into play. And then later on in the game, obviously when you have more mana to throw at this, it just becomes that much better. The ultimate, yes, it does feel a little bit weak, but it's what I would expect from an ultimate for a casting cost of 2 and X on a Planeswalker. You don't want a card like this to have a hyper powerful ultimate that it can get to too quickly. So the ultimate's just fine. Sometimes it could end the game for you. Other times it can just damage your opponent. And then there'll be times where it's not going to do anything at all. And I think that's fair for this casting cost. And also the fact that the other 2 abilities are really, really good. Fantastic card, of course, unlimited. I think that goes without saying. This is a bomb if you're able to play those colors and you open it. And there's a lot you can do with this in Commander. This will be a really, really fun Commander card for those heavy creature decks. All right, next let's get into Rhonas the Indomitable. And of course, this is the Green God. Before we get into the card, I just want to quickly give a shout out to the Magic Mike's podcast. This was actually their preview card. And sadly, somebody leaked it earlier this morning. They were supposed to show it during their program, which is tomorrow. And this probably would have been like our big reveal for tomorrow. And unfortunately, we got it today. Now, the reason I say that is because I kind of feel bad for the folks that work on the podcast. They all do an awesome job. I listen to it very frequently, actually. And it's just kind of sad to see that they lost their spoiler like that. So I don't really think they watch a lot of my stuff or anything like that. But if for some reason one of you are watching, sorry that happened. I think that's kind of sad. But let's talk about the card itself. A green and 2, legendary creature god, mythic 5/5, death touch, indestructible. Rhonas the Indomitable can't attack or block unless you control another creature with power 4 or greater. But you can pay a green and 2, another target creature gets +2/+7, gains trample till end of turn. This one might be my favorite now. Yesterday I said the white one was my favorite out of the 3 we saw. This one I like maybe even a little better because it only costs 3. Death touch, at some point death touch doesn't matter anymore. When you have 5 power on a creature, you're kind of like, okay, death touch, but it's better than nothing. What makes this interesting to me, though, is the fact that it feels like it's a little bit easier to turn on than maybe some of the other ones we've seen. 3 casting cost, and then if I can get another creature of power 4 or greater, this will then be able to attack or block. But if I have, for example, a 2/2 bear that I put into play on turn 2, I can use my mana. Granted, it's going to slow me down a little bit. But if the situation presents itself, I can pay the 3 mana to make that a 4/2 to end of turn. And now I'm attacking in with a 4/2 Trampler and a 5/5 Death Touch Indestructible. Yeah, that seems like a good start. So I do think this does have the potential, again, to make it to standard. It is contingent upon this type of archetype being viable in the meta. So maybe it's not the first meta we see when the set comes out, but I think at some point down the road, if not immediately, this card definitely has potential to get there. Again, another bomb in limited. You'll be really, really happy to play this there. And it's another card that I think could be really good in Commander too. Next, we'll move on to a white card. It's Anointed Procession. It's a white and 3 enchantment rare. If an effect would create one or more tokens under your control, it creates twice that many tokens instead. That's actually pretty awesome. First thing that jumps to my mind, of course, is Commander. I mean, there's some amazing token Commander decks out there. There's Commanders that make tokens. This card, I think, is going to be a casual staple. It's awesome in so many Commander decks. It's going to be great in some kitchen table Magic. Get your foils of this while you can, because I feel like a lot of casual players are going to want foils of this particular card. Aside from that, we'll talk about limited. I'm usually not a fan of enchantments that come into play, especially for 4 mana, and do nothing on their own. That's really hard for me to get past. However, if I have enough targets in my limited deck, maybe I drafted an Orzhov deck with some Embalm cards and maybe a lot of zombie token creation, something like that, all of a sudden this card becomes maybe worth the risk for me, because I do think the upside could be really, really heavy and potentially could win you a game even with those type of interactions. Standard, I love this card's interaction with Gideon, ally of Zendikar, assuming he doesn't get banned in the next update. But aside from that, the tricky part of making this work is the fact that if you put 4 of these in a deck and 4 Gideons, you're starting to really fill up your 4 spot, and it might be hard to make a curve work and work really efficiently in a standard deck. There's a lot of upside to this card, and somebody may brew something that truly works with this, but I don't think it's going to be easy. I think it might be difficult to find the right deck that really is going to empower this card, considering its forecasting cost and the fact that, again, it doesn't do anything on its own. It is contingent upon other things happening, and that's always kind of a little bit awkward when it comes to competitive standard, right? So we're going to have to wait and see on this one. I kind of hope someone figures it out, but if it does happen, it might not be right away. All right, let's look at a couple of cards that are really probably meant more for limited than anything. These were spoiled by Entertainment Weekly, as you can see by the watermark in the bottom left corner there. Cryptic Serpent is the first one, 2 blue and 5. It's a serpent, 6/5, and it will cost 1 less to cast for each instant and sorcery card in your graveyard. So your first inclination is, well, maybe that's not horrible in like a control deck in a constructed format, because you'll get the casting cost down faster that way. The problem is, though, it's still a 6/5. It doesn't really have any evasion or anything like that. It doesn't have hexproof. So it's really easy to deal with, and it doesn't feel like a great win condition. In limited, I think it's just fine, though. And yes, in limited, you're not always playing a whole lot of instants and sorceries compared to your creature ratio. But even if you're able to maybe get this out on turn like 5 or something, it still seems really good in limited. Grim Strider, a black and 3 horror, 6/6. It will get -1/-1 for each card in your hand. Now, we're going to see more of this today, but it's becoming obvious as the puzzle comes together that black and black-red are trying to do a hellbent aggro thing. This card falls in line with that concept pretty well, and we'll look at some other cards later that do as well. But I do think this one, even in a real tight deck that's all in on that strategy, I feel like there might be better things in standard for that deck than this particular card. I do think it's good in limited, though, especially draft, if you can draft that type of archetype. All right, we got a couple more commons here from black. Again, these are basically limited cards. We have Doom Dissenter, a black and 1 human. When this dies, though, it creates a 2/2 black zombie creature token. It's a 1/1. Now, typically, I don't like spending 2 for 1/1s, even in limited. However, I know when this does die eventually, I'm going to get my crack at my 2/2. I'll get that 2/2 zombie at that point. And what's nice about this, too, is there's a lot of cards, we've seen them already this week, there's another one coming up, that when they enter the battlefield, you have to put a certain amount of -1/-1 counters on one of your own creatures. Well, this is perfect. It's like a lightning rod for that effect. It takes that effect off other creatures that you don't want it on, and it replaces this one with a 2/2 zombie. That's actually pretty cool for you, and a lot of interactions limited. Unburden, 2 black and 1 sorcery. Target player discards 2 cards, cycling 2. This one is basically Mind Rot, but you can cycle it away. And that's actually nice because there's a lot of times you draw Mind Rot at the wrong time and it's just not useful anymore. Later in the game, your opponent doesn't have any cards in their hand or they're just holding onto lands or something. So you just go ahead and cycle it in a case like that, and wonderful, you hopefully hit something that is more useful at that time. So I really like what they did with this. You do have to remember too, Mind Rot is not random discard. It is your opponent choosing. It's a good limited card. Doesn't always fit into every single limited deck, but this one does make it maybe that much more playable. I think it's worth mentioning too that in a pinch you can actually use this on yourself to keep your hand size down, because that will matter sometimes in this format. Alright, now yesterday I said the zombie archetype seems to be getting some tools, but I just don't know if those tools are making it strong enough to hang with the really streamlined decks that are out there right now, like your Mardu Vehicles and your 4-color Saheeli. Well, these 3 cards that were revealed go a long way to help that archetype get there. The first one is great. It's an uncommon, Lord of the Accursed, a black and 2 zombie. Other zombies get +1/+1, 2/3, and you can pay a black and 1 and tap this to give all zombies menace until end of turn. Nice finisher potentially for this zombie deck if it can go wide. Not to mention, it's a Lord, it's a common, it's not legendary. This is actually pretty awesome. Plague Belcher, a black and 2 zombie beast, 5/4 with menace. Now, here's one of those cards. When it enters the battlefield, you have to put 2 -1/-1 counters on a creature you control. But also, whenever another zombie you control dies, opponent loses 1 life. A couple of things here. First off, that initial ability is something that you could hopefully transfer over to maybe one of your zombie tokens, or maybe that card we saw a few moments ago, and find value there. In that case, you got yourself a 5/4 menace on turn 3. That's pretty good. But even if it's a 3/2 menace on turn 3, it's actually still a little higher on the curve than you'd expect a card to be in limited. Still decent. Not to mention, we haven't even talked about that second ability yet, which is when zombies die, an opponent can lose life. It brings kind of that aristocrat strategy into the deck. I'm kind of wondering if we're going to see more of that as more cards are revealed for black. That could be quite interesting. And maybe that is how the zombie deck breaks into a tier 1 status. Finally, we have Dread Wanderer. This is a nice 1-drop, 2/1 zombie jackal. Good target for the previous card too. It does enter the battlefield tapped, but if you pay a black and 2, you can return it from your graveyard to the battlefield. And you can only do this at any time you can cast a sorcery, and if you have 1 or fewer cards in your hand. So again, that Hellbent theme is coming back again. But this is a card that is recurable. Now granted, it does come back tapped. It's not the fastest thing in the world. But a 2/1 for 1 with this extra ability attached to it feels pretty decent to me, in the fact that it actually can block too. Typically, things that come back from the graveyard like this cannot block. They usually put that clause on it. This time, what they did was they just slowed it down by having it enter tapped. But it's kind of nice. It has more versatility than some cards that were similar to this in the past. Next, we have Honored Hydra in green. And this was actually previewed yesterday on Wizards, and somehow I forgot to add it to the show yesterday. So you may have already seen this one. I'll go kind of fast through it. It's a green and 5 Snake Hydra Trample, Embalm, a green and 3. It's a 6/6. And of course, on the right side there, you see the zombie version, the Embalm token. Now, what you want to do with this card is pitch it and then play the Embalm cost on turn 4 and get yourself a 6/6 Trampler and attack it on turn 5. That's the dream. Now, how consistent will that be? Just depends on what kind of tools you have with this card. I think it might be a little too inconsistent for standard, but in limited, if you have a way to pull that off, that could be a beating right there. And even if you don't, playing this on turn 6 and getting a 6/6 Trampler that when it does eventually die, you can bring back for 4 mana, that's really good in limited too. Quarry Hauler. This one costs a green and 3. It's a camel 4/3. When this enters the battlefield, for each kind of counter on target permanent, put another counter of that kind on it, or remove one from it. So this is a way to remove maybe some of those -1/-1 counters, or you can add a brick counter or a loyalty counter. So there's a little bit of versatility there. I do like it. It only targets one thing. And for your 4 mana, you're also getting a 4/3 body. That feels good in limited. The 4/3 on a camel is actually pretty impressive. That must be a huge camel. That's kind of interesting, but nevertheless, I do think this is a fine limited card. It's going to be better with some interactions than others, obviously, depending on what else you have going on in your deck, but I do think those are fine stats for 4 mana. I don't really think it's going to do much more outside of limited, but maybe if you're really looking for like your 99th card in Commander to play in that +1/+1 counter deck, and you really can't find anything else, this will do. And it's a giant camel. It's definitely a conversation piece. All right, next we have a cycle of cards that was previewed by Marshall Sutcliffe, and the first part of the cycle was Renewed Faith, which of course was previously revealed, and that card also was a reprint. These four, however, are the ones we'll focus on today. We have Vizier of Tumbling Sands, a blue and 2 human cleric. You can tap it to untap another target permanent, and you can cycle it away for a blue and 1, and if you do, it will untap target permanent. That's actually pretty interesting to me because you don't see that ability happening all too frequently in blue. Every once in a while, of course, and we've seen it used in degenerate ways with Splinter Twin combo and stuff like that. But it is a unique ability. It does allow you to do different things, like maybe give a creature quasi-vigilance, or maybe untap that land you need to get some extra mana when you need it. And that's pretty cool. Again, I feel like it's more of a limited card considering its casting cost and such, but I do like the versatility cycling brings. Stir of the Sands, 2 black and 4. This will give you 3 2/2 black zombie creature tokens, but you can cycle it away for a black and 3 and just get one of those tokens. Again, if you can't get up to 6 mana very efficiently, you have an out that allows you to find some value and replace this card. Again, it feels really good and limited to me. Deem Worthy, another strong limited card. It's going to do 7 damage to a creature for a red and 4. It's an instant. Although I should point out, the previous card, even though it is a sorcery, you can cycle that at instant speed, which means you could surprise somebody with a blocker there. But this one actually is an instant. And if you don't need to do 7 damage, you can pay a red and 3 and just do 2 damage. A lot of times that maybe that's all you need to do, and you get the extra bonus of replacing the card when you do. Finally, you have Shafet Monitor. It's a green and 5 lizard, cycling, green and 3, 6/5. When you cycle this, you may search your library for a basic land card or a desert card, put it onto the battlefield, then shuffle your library. We'll talk about deserts in just a second, but as far as the basic land goes, I will say it does not come into play tapped. That's actually pretty cool. Again, the cost is a little bit expensive for, say, a ramp deck or something in standard, but it could be quite good for you, especially for color fixing in limited. And it has great stats, a 6/5 for 6, even though it doesn't have any sort of evasion or anything. It's still good enough a lot of times in limited in a green deck for you. Now, what about that desert? Are we going to see deserts in the set? Well, don't worry, because Entertainment Weekly has got you covered with Sunscorched Desert. This is a land desert. It's a common. When this enters the battlefield, it deals 1 damage to target player, and you can tap it for colorless mana. So I kind of wonder when I look at this card, if maybe, just maybe, Bloodthirst is going to come back in the next block. And if you're not familiar with that mechanic, basically it was a mechanic on creatures that said when the creature comes into play, if an opponent was damaged that turn, they would get a bonus in the form of +1/+1 counters. And it could be like 1 or 2 or 3, just depending on what it was for that particular creature. And I can't really think of a great use for this card other than turning on Bloodthirst. So maybe it's coming? I don't know. It could just be simply top-down design. It's a desert, your opponent's going through the desert, they're getting worn down, and that could be all there is to this. And it's just a common way to add some flavor, and maybe we'll see some more Desert Matters cards like the previous one we saw a few moments ago that can search for these as we go on with this set and the next. Maybe that's all they're getting at, and we might see some more different types of deserts, I would assume, too. If not this set, maybe the next. So they might be building towards something here, but one thing I will point out, it's kind of crazy and probably not truly realistic, but if anybody tried to pull the copycat combo on you and you have that green card from the previous slide, you can actually cycle it at instant speed, grab this, put it into play, redirect the 1 damage to Saheeli, and end the combo. Yeah, there's probably better ways to do that in standard. But if you're looking for some crazy answer to that combo in your cube or something like that, I don't know, maybe it could be fun. All right, we got a couple of the split cards to look at. We have Reduced to Rubble. The reduced side, a blue and 2 instant, counter target spell unless its controller pays 3, with Rubble being red and 2 sorcery with Aftermath, up to 3 target lands. Don't untap during their controller's next untap step. At first, when I looked at this, I said, this is a fine limited card. Like, I wouldn't mind playing this in a limited deck. It feels like I could mess my opponent up and take them off their lands at some point and surprise them with a counter spell early on. But the more I thought about it, I figured, you know what? Is this something that I might want in a control mirror match, assuming I could get a hold of the red mana when I need it? Feels like it could be good there as a sideboard mirror card, so I don't know if that becomes a thing of standard. It has some potential there, I think. Next we have Heaven to Earth. And the Heaven side is an instant, a green, and X, and it will deal X damage to each creature with flying. Earth, 2 red, and X, sorcery, aftermath. Earth deals X damage to each creature without flying. So it's a little bit of an homage to Hurricane and Earthquake from the original Magic set, Alpha Beta Unlimited, right? And it's a little clunky. I will say, though, I think this is going to be really good in Limited. The fact that green a lot of times has trouble with flyers anyway, so it's pretty easy to pull that off and deal with even small flyers really effectively. Secondly, it's in your graveyard then. If you need a sweep that's going to hit the ground, it's there as a panic button. So I actually think this is really good in Limited. I think it's a little too slow and clunky maybe for Standard to kind of get there in that particular format. And you'll have more mana options and more access to different removal and stuff in Standard, where I don't think this will be necessary. But I do really like it, at least in a lot of Limited matchups. Nehem the Worthy. Now here's another card that I feel like is maybe a wink wink nudge nudge to something in the future. It's a red, black, and 1 Minotaur Warrior Legendary. First strike. Other Minotaurs you control have first strike. As long as you have 1 or fewer cards in your hand, Minotaurs you control get +2/+0. And whenever this deals combat damage to a player, each player discards a card, and it's a 2/2. Now, the reason I say that this is probably leading to something is because we haven't seen a whole lot of Minotaurs running around the world of Amonkhet yet. Maybe there's more that haven't been spoiled. Perhaps we'll see a lot in Hour of Devastation. Who knows? Or maybe it'll be the next block. I think this is kind of a look forward to something like that. However, this card does have a place in the current build of Amonkhet too, because we know that Rakdos is really trying to be super aggressive and trying to whittle down your hand size, and it wants you to be at least close to Hellbent. Well, this card really fits that mold. First off, it's a 2/2 for striker for 3. That's nice on its own. It also, if you can get to the point where you have 1 or fewer cards in your hand, becomes a 4/2 for a striker. That's excellent. Now, on top of that, when it does do damage to an opponent, not only does each opponent have to discard a card, but you also have to discard a card, which helps you keep your hand size down in certain situations. So yeah, it's aggro. It's helping you keep your hand size down. If this deck can cross over into Standard, this could certainly be a part of it. I think it's a little unclear at this point. I do think there will be an aggro deck in Standard based off the cards we've been seeing. The question is it going to be mono red, or is it going to be worth it to put the black in there? And so far, we're seeing more cards, at least in the last couple of days, that make me feel like maybe it will be worth it to put the black in there too and actually play Rakdos as opposed to just red. Aside from Standard, though, this is a great card for you in Limited. Even if it's a 2/2 for striker for 3 and nothing more than that for a while, it's still going to be really good and really strong and deal with a lot of threats that are going to be smaller creatures on the board. And yes, there is a group of players out there that do play Minotaur tribal stuff, and you see it casually or even in Commander, so they're going to be really happy to see this card. Next, we have Pyramid of the Pantheon. It costs 1, it's an artifact. You can pay 2 and tap, add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool, put a brick counter on this card, tap, add 3 mana of any 1 color to your mana pool, and only activate this ability, though, if there are 3 or more brick counters on Pyramid of the Pantheon. And, of course, this is a rare. So it's kind of like Gilded Lotus that you have to pay for as you go. And in the meantime, it does fix color if you're in a situation where you need to fix your color. So that's interesting. I think it's a little clunky, though, for Standard. It takes a little too much work to get there. I mean, Gilded Lotus is great if you can get there, especially if you only invested 1 mana in it initially and then kind of paid for it in installments. Wonderful. But I just think that by that time, too much could go wrong. So aside from Standard, I think this is fine for you in Limited if your deck needs something like this. It's good if you need to fix color, and it's good if you want to ramp into some bigger things. Then by all means, I would go ahead and play it. I think this could be fun in Commander too. I mean, sure, you have cards like Gilded Lotus. You don't need this necessarily all the time, but it might be an interesting alternative or an addition to a card like Gilded Lotus in the right deck, especially if you're just trying to ramp into some crazy big things. Could be kind of fun. Having said that, those are the cards for today, and tomorrow we'll be back with another video. We'll recap and analyze everything that happens within the next 24 hours like we've been doing. I do kind of feel like tomorrow might be a little slower day since we got the Green God today. I kind of assume we're going to get the Last God on Thursday, but I guess we'll wait and see. But until next time, thanks for watching. Please remember to like and subscribe, and have a great day. Hey, thanks for watching. This video is made possible by the generous support of viewers like you on Patreon. Check out the description below for links to our Patreon page as well as our Amazon affiliate store, where a small percentage of all sales will also help support the channel. Finally, if you haven't had a chance yet to subscribe, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any new videos on Heroes and Legends. Talk to you again soon, and have a great day.